Every people who experience a cultural and historical emptiness in themselves will always deny their responsibility in the building of the society they need and rely on other people to do that for them. Peace and power, freedom and decolonization to all African people. This is King Kabbalah from the African Continental Unity Party, member of the communication team. Here we are again on our weekly rendezvous where we discuss some thought-provoking concepts that can eventually open our mind to look at Africa in a way we should be looking at Africa and at ourselves, away from the Western concept of society, of life, of science, spirituality, and you name it. And today what I want to discuss with us is just the emptiness that we experience as African people. And this emptiness which lead us to always look outwards to the solutions that sometimes or most of times can be found inwards. Because every people have a culture, have a history, and have a future. Now, when you experience this emptiness of history, of culture, you don't have a future that is structured on your own worldview, the future that reflects your own understanding of life or of reality or of the world. The only future that you can have is that future that is based on the ambitions of imitating other people. Now, let's go back to the history and see why I'm saying what I'm saying. When we came out of, let's assume that we came out of colonialism, because I'm saying let's assume because we are still in what is called neo-colonialism, which in reality is a new colonialism. Now, in 1960s, we were celebrating in Africa. We were celebrating the so-called African independence. And right after that independence, we were proposed or we were given a formula for the African development, because we believed then that we are now free, we just have to develop. Now, for that development to take place, we were given the formula that was called economic development or modernization. Now, the premises of these theories was that Africa is kind of a backward society, so it has to be modernized to imitate the Western society for the development to take place, for Africa to develop like Europe has developed. In other words, when you look at all the formulas of development that we have been implementing since the 1960s up to the present time, have all been based on the ideas or understanding of the Western society, or on ideas that have been inspired by Western thinkers, not really on ideas that Africans had to come up with themselves, structured, fashioned, and based on the African culture, African reality, and African resources. But the ideas that we had been implementing have all come from the West. As I said, we started from modernization to exit or to go out of our backwardness so that we can become like Europe, like France, like America, like you name them, all these countries that are kind of a model of African development. And when this agenda of modernization failed, it was now the agenda of what is called industrialization. That means we need to build industries so that Africa can develop. And for these industries to be developed, we had to go to the IMF, to the World Bank, to borrow money that had to build or to help the building of these industries. And that money ended up being paid and still being paid with the blood of the poor people, because the industrialization itself had failed as well. And around 1970, 1980, we had what was called now neoliberalism. See, as a model of development, still coming from the West. They told us now, okay, for you to develop, what you need to do, you need to liberalize your markets. You need to free your markets. You need to reduce government's intervention in the market, government interference in the markets. Private enterprises need to flourish, need to be given more power, need to be given more access and stuff like that. And it looks like it has failed as well. Now today we are, I don't know, sustainable development or globalization, you can name it. So in a nutshell, since the 1960s, we have been jumping from one philosophy to the next philosophy, all inspired, instructed, and invented by the West for our own development. And in our mindset, we have been thinking that in doing this or in implementing these policies, we will one day be able to develop our countries like England, like France, like Germany, like all these so-called industrial and developed countries have developed themselves. And this is just shows how empty we are within ourselves, because our understanding of development is based on the outside world, not in the inside world. While the development itself, the process of development is inside out process. Development begins from inside, from within, and reflects from outside of you. But this is what we have been missing. Now, for me to explain to you what I'm trying to say here, all the key messages that I have for you here, I need to borrow the concept of lost key by my Oheneba Ahinkang. A lost key concept is simply this. If you walk down the streets in darkness, right, and you have a key, and as you're walking, the key drops and you lost the key, and you lift your eyes in front, you see the light is there. What will you do to find the key? Are you going to go under the lights to look for the key, or are you going to stay in the dark place where you lost the key to look for the key and to find the key? And the answer is very simple. For you to find the key, you are not supposed to go where there's a light to look the key there, because you didn't lose the key there. You lost the key in the darkness. So you need to search in the darker place where you are to find your key there. Or what you can do as well is to bring the lights in the place where it is darker for you to look for the key and find the key. And this is the reality of Africa today. We have lost our key during the darker age of us as African people. And what we're trying to do now is to go to Europeans, to go to where there's a light, where we see development, where we see progress, where we see prosperity, to look for the answers to our own problems, which have been born in the period of darkness. And we cannot find the answers there, because our answers need to be found where we lost our power, where we lost our dignity, where we lost our humanity as African people, which were our keys. And we lost them not in Europe. We lost them not in modernization theory. We didn't lose them not in globalization theory. We didn't lose them not in industrialization theory. We lost them in Africa, in our culture, in our tradition. That's where we lost our freedom. The moment that we lost our tradition, the moment that we lost the focus on the development of our culture, the moment that we lost our perception of life, our way of life as African people, to embrace the way of life of other people, that's when we lost our key. That's when we lost our human beingness, our sense of dignity, of identity. That's when we got what we call today this emptiness that we are experiencing today. So this emptiness cannot be filled with Western concepts of life. We need to recover our culture so that we can regain our freedom. The key that we have lost today as African people is this dimension, this power of freedom to decide for ourselves, to determine our own future, to determine our own destiny, to decide what we need to do with our resources today. You see, there are two major challenges that facing Africa today. One challenge is that Africa is not in charge of her own destiny. You see, our destiny today, what we are living today, our present time, was decided at the Berlin Conference, 1884-1885, by European countries. And since then, we have never been able to decide or to sit down and decide what our destiny should be. Even though we pretend sometimes to make those decisions, in order to make them realistic or to accomplish them, we run to the West, we run to the World Bank to borrow money to accomplish them. And that money comes with conditions that eventually hinder the accomplishment of those projects or those ideas that we had about our destiny. So we have never been able to decide about our own future as African people. The reality of our life today is still being decided by European countries. Don't forget, just recently, last year, in American Congress, they were passing law to prevent any African country or to punish any African country to cooperate with, for example, Russia, because Europe or America are in conflict with Russia. They had to dictate the future of Africa, even though the relationship that we can have with Russia can be beneficial to us. They were saying that no African country can have any relationship or any trade or any business with Russia, and they were about to impose any kind of sanctions or some kind of sanctions on whatever country that will derive from that perspective. And this is a control of the future of Africa, because in that Congress, no African leader was there. No African people were consulted on that, the same way it happened in 1884, 1885 at the Berlin Conference, where they sat among themselves and decided what Africa must be and Africa must become. That's number one challenge. And number two challenge that Africa faces is that we don't control our resources. Do you know that the gold that you have in Ghana, the price of that gold is fixed by the World Trade Organization, which is itself an entity owned by Western countries? The petrol that you have in Nigeria, the diamonds that I have in the Congo, the platinum that you have, I don't know, Sierra Leone, South Africa, you name it, all these natural resources that we have, the price is dictated by the very same client to whom we want to sell them. Can you imagine? I'm coming to buy your house, I'm coming to buy your belonging, but I'm the one who need to fix the price of that thing that I want. What price will I be fixing for that thing? Obviously, the price which I would deem necessary, and which may not be beneficial to you. And that's the reality of Africa today. That's why they pay 10%. What they pay or what costs them to have the natural resources of Africa is 10% of the wealth they make out of these natural resources they steal from Africa. So we don't control our destiny and we don't control our resources. So we need to recover our power. We need to recover our strength. And to do that, we need to go back to where we lost this power, where we lost this strength. It was not in modernization theory, it was in our culture. The day that we looked down on our culture and thought that this culture is demoniac, is evil, we looked on our ancestors, we said that they were evil, and we started embracing other ancestors or Jewish ancestors, replacing them with our ancestors. That is when we lost the key, because the strength of every people is built on their culture, on their tradition, and that culture and tradition is in what I call in sync with their history. If I tell you today Who are you? We say, I'm a Ghanaian. And I ask you, tell me the history of Ghana. Eventually, you will start with colonialism, right? And that is not your true history. You have a history that predates colonialism, that predates the coming of white men in Africa. But why you can't talk about that history? Because you identify yourself as Ghanaian, right? And Ghana is the creation of the white men. Therefore, your history as a Ghanaian must begin with white men coming to Africa. You cannot have a history of Ghana before the coming of white men in Africa. You cannot talk about the history of Congo before the coming of white men in Africa. You cannot talk about the history of South Africa or of Nigeria. All these histories of that we have to start with the coming of white men, because that's when Ghana, Nigeria, Senegal, all these countries came into existence. Actually, they are the creations of the Western society. You see? So by focusing on your Ghanaianism or your Congolism or whatever you can call it, you undermine the glorious history that you have had in the past. And that is the only history that can inspire your culture, your tradition, that can be also the map to the world view, to the future, to the destiny that we are supposed to have. And by embracing that previous history, we will be able to recover the key that we have lost, which is the power of Africa. Are you able to recover this key, which is the power? I'm going to give you one key, or one strategy, is to organize ourselves, is to unite ourselves, is to destroy the colonialist projects which has undermined our culture. Because today we are living on the basis of what I can call artificial culture imported by the Western society. But it is time to reuse our culture that allowed us to build pyramids, to build civilizations, to do all these great things that our ancestors did. But for us to do that, we need, number one, the United States of Africa. We need to come together in a continental organization such as this African Continental Unity Party. So if you haven't been able to join us, this is a call for you, fellow African. Please join the ACUP, the African Continental Unity Party, so that together we can build Africa as a global power base, because this was the dream of our ancestors. This is the dream of us today, and this is the aspiration of our children, to live on the continent which has the power to dictate its future and to control its resources. If we are not able to do that today, then we have to concede that our children will go through another harsh slavery of, more than 500 years again to come. And I hope this is not your dream, as it is not mine. Therefore, join us in the ACUP. Let's build this agenda together. Let's build ACUP in your country, in Ghana, in Nigeria, in Zimbabwe, Sierra Leone, wherever you are. You are the agent of change that Africa needs for the future that we want. So get involved, just all of us we are, so that together collectively we can do for ourselves what the Western society and their theories and philosophies have never been able to do for us. Peace and power. Again, if you have two shoes, please sell one and buy a sword. If you have two trousers, sell one and buy a sword, because now it is time for revolution. This revolution cannot be done on the streets. This revolution is not about burning cars, but it is actually about building cars and selling them. This revolution is in the mind, because if we don't control our mind, somebody else must be in control, and then our bodies are the tools that the oppressor will use to oppress us and to oppress our people. Freedom and light, freedom and decolonization. We see you next time for another conversation. Please share, like, and subscribe. Thank you very much again.